Good evening. I'm Mike Knetter. Welcome to the UW Now live stream series, where we bring you experts from the UW community to talk about timely and important topics. Last week, the chair of the Wisconsin Senate's Universities and Technical Colleges Committee released a report, A Wisconsin Roadmap to Success in Higher Education for the 21st Century. This report identifies several important trends and potential responses that could help the system adapt to current and looming challenges. You can find a link to the report in the live chat. Tonight, we've assembled a panel of experts to review and discuss the report, its recommendations, and other changes that might benefit UW-Madison, UW system, and state economic development. Joining us tonight are Katharine Lyall, an economist who's written extensively about higher education and applied her knowledge as former president of the UW system from 1992 to 2004. Cory Nettles, UW Law graduate, managing director at Generation Growth Capital, and former Wisconsin Secretary of Commerce. Ananth Seshadri is the Economics Department chairman and holds the Todd E. and Elizabeth H. Warnock Distinguished Chair of Economics. And we're also fortunate to have Senator Roger Roth, the chair of the Universities and Technical Colleges Committee and author of the report that is the subject of our discussion tonight. Thanks for joining us. And kicking us off this evening is Senator Roth. He's a Wisconsin senator from Appleton and is the chair of the Universities and Technical Colleges Committee. He was elected to the 56th Assembly District in 2006 and the 19th Senate District in 2014. In his first term as senator, he served as the chair of the Workforce Development, Public Works, and Military Affairs Committee, and subsequently became the youngest senator to serve as president of the Senate. I believe it was a tie. Senator Roth is also a graduate of UW-Oshkosh, and he carries on a great family tradition in politics. Many would remember the service of Toby Roth. So thank you for joining us, Senator Roth. The floor is yours.
Well, I really do appreciate that, Mike, that introduction and the opportunity here to be with you all today. And I know the other panelists here are very esteemed people in their own right. I've been able to watch them and learn from them. So I'm honored to be a part with them here today, and looking forward over just the next couple of minutes to talk to you about some of the work we have been doing in the legislature. And as Mike alluded to, last week, the Universities and Tech Colleges Committee in the Senate, we issued a report. And it was actually kind of an unusual thing in the sense that committees here in the legislature, going back as far as one can remember here, haven't really issued reports before. In fact, the way business is typically done in the Capitol, legislators go and author bills, they introduce those bills, committees meet and have hearings on those bills, and of course their fates are up to a thousand different things along the way. When I became selected as the chair of this committee, you know, I don't have a four-year institution in my district. Oshkosh just to the south, my alma mater, Green Bay just to the north of my district. And it's not a committee really that's gotten a terrible amount of attention through the years, probably doesn't average more than a half a bills every year. Most of the work that revolves around the universities typically had been done in the past in the Joint Finance Committee when you look at the funding of the UW system, the capital budget, and so forth. So I sat down and really worked with my staff and the service agencies here to kind of reinvent what we could do with this committee. And instead of starting the process on, let's think up some bills that we could introduce, we sort of started a step earlier in the process. And that's, I wanted to take this committee outside of Madison, across the state of Wisconsin, which was a bit challenging earlier this year in the COVID environment. But we were able to touch the campuses of UW-Whitewater, of UW-Stevens Point, and UW-Green Bay. We look to, of course, in the rest of this year, hit the other four-year institutions. But my goal was to get out and hear from experts in the field on a variety of challenges that are facing higher education, and begin by starting with a report that would offer recommendations that we could then work on and build legislation potentially later on here this fall in the session. So I want to stress that for anyone who's had an opportunity, and I hope if you haven't had it yet, look at the report. You can go to my website too. If you Google or Bing that, you'll be able to find it. The report's linked there. It's about 97 odd pages long, but look at it and read through it, and just remember that I view this as the starting point of a larger conversation whose time has come in Wisconsin. I think if we were to sit down today, and this is kind of as I worked with my staff on scoping this out, we were to sit down today and devise a system of higher education in Wisconsin, and nothing existed here, certainly you would not end up with what we have. That's not to say that what we have is all bad. It's just there's a lot of duplication. There are locations of campuses which, quite frankly, I don't know if you could justify. You've got 3 four-year institutions, River Falls, Stout, Eau Claire, within 100 miles of each other. You've got other challenges too in a place like UW Superior, which barely has 2,100 students. That doesn't mean that there isn't value in those places. It just means that if we were to start anew, the current structure that we have right now of Madison and then the 12 other regional comprehensives, I don't think that would carry out. So recognizing that with the challenges we're facing, and I'll talk about those in a moment, but clearly demographics is probably the largest driver of that, recognizing that we wouldn't do it the way we have it now, but also knowing that there isn't the will. And I say that, as a legislator, I like to think that knowing what should be done, we could do it. I'll just be honest, I don't think there's the will in the legislature to shut down a campus. And I know from time to time you would hear people say that maybe that should be done. Certainly in the business world, if you had stores in a franchise that were underperforming, those are decisions that get made every day. But on a political basis, to find the will, to find a senator or a representative who are willing to take the vote that maybe they knew is right, but would be detrimental to the district, that'd be a very hard thing to do. We had a committee hearing last week, and one of the appointees for the Board of Regents mentioned perhaps we need to adopt what the federal government does with a BRAC list when they shut down military bases. Perhaps we need to look at something like that, for these institutions of higher education. Well, I didn't want to get stuck down in those details. And I didn't want to have a report that says shut down this campus or that campus. So if we weren't going to do that, where do we end up? And that's where we took the input from these committee hearings. And what you'll see is probably the one that's getting the most attention is our recommendation for a reorganization into 4 regions plus the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So we would have a Northeast region, we'd have a Northwest region, a Southeast region, we would have a Milwaukee region, and then of course UW-Madison standing alone. And our point in this is that, when you look at those challenges with demographics leading the way, we've lost 15,000 students in the last decade. We're forecast over the next 15 years in the system to lose another 15,000 students. Clearly, we have a problem. When you take 30,000 students out of the system, we have a problem just with not enough students in seats. So we've got to find a way to make sure that in this environment, we can deliver a high level of education with our regional 4-year institutions that meet the demands of their employers in those areas, provide the students with an excellent education, but in the environment of declining enrollment. So UW-Madison stands apart. We had our first hearing. Nathan Graw came and did a phenomenal job walking the committee through just those demographic challenges and how institutions like UW-Madison, they're never going to have a problem going in. They could turn on the spigot and get as many students as they wanted to. Those premier institutions, they're like a Harvard or some of these others. I mean, there's always going to be demand there for them, but not so for a River Falls or a Superior or maybe even a Platteville or some of our others. So with the regionalization, our thought was, we could have those 12 comprehensives we could have them specialize in certain areas. They don't have to be all things to all people. Specialize in certain areas, and then within the region, they could collaborate and work together to make sure that students in those geographic areas had access to those high-level programming, specialized programming within the comprehensive universities there. Our goal is, in our recommendation, is to direct the Board of Regents to fully look at this reorganization plan. And by we estimate that we think we could find 15% in savings, and we could reinvest that back into our university system. We could make sure that faculty pay was in compensation, was brought on levels, UW-Madison to the Big Ten, at the other four-year regionals to the national average. We could reinvest that money into online education. And that was another main point, advancing higher education pathways of this report is we try to fight for more students in the future. We're not going to be able to do it if we don't wholeheartedly embrace online education. Make UW-Wisconsin, that name, be synonymous as it is right now with a quality education. Let us compete for individuals in rural areas or other places around the state and country who can't start their career at a four-year institution. Instead of going to the University of Phoenix or Southern New Hampshire University, let's make the University of Wisconsin the starter place for people when they're looking for those online degrees. And then hopefully we can get them to come and finish up in year 3 and year 4 at one of our four-year regional comprehensives, or maybe UW-Madison. So it's finding those savings by restructuring, which is a demand we're going to have to do because of the declining enrollments, taking those savings, pouring them back into the system so we can be more competitive and more relevant, providing that kind of education that the workforce is going to demand, our employees are going to demand, and quite frankly, it just seems technology and the market is going towards. We also talked about campus free speech. And I think, I don't think anyone on the panel is going to disagree with the idea that people ought to be able to have constitutional rights to express themselves. No other place in a college campus, where I believe students they need to be challenged on their beliefs, not hide from them. In a safe academic environment, they need to defend the opinions they have, in the beliefs that they have. That is how we arrive and derive at what truth actually is. And I know the Board of Regents has a policy. We heard testimony on this. We've got to figure out a way, and we offer a few recommendations in there, another commission to study it out even more further. But what we've landed on that I can start with is, I don't think another bill in Madison is going to fix that. But we do need to study that. We need to make sure that our students going to campus and our faculty have the academic freedom to speak their mind in search for what that truth is. The committee also looked at expanding dual enrollment opportunities. When we look at college affordability and accessibility, there are some school districts, some high schools across Wisconsin that are doing a really good job. And I'll just have to say, I didn't know this before we started this process, but the Neenah Joint School District, which is in the southern part of my Senate district, has been working very well with the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh in being able to teach courses in the high school by which the high school students can get college credit at UW-Oshkosh. So I want to congratulate and tip of the hat to UW-Oshkosh. The Neenah School District, they have a requirement. Students can't graduate unless they have at least one college credit. We want to see what we can do to expand that. They have some school graduates, seniors, who have 18 college credits already under their belt by the time they graduate. That's phenomenal. And when you want to talk about a way to bring affordability and accessibility, having seniors show up and already have a semester under their belt, whether it be at a four-year institution or a tech college, that's a powerful thing. So we're looking at ways to expand that as well. And then lastly, when it comes to budget considerations, we make some strong recommendations on the tuition freeze. I know Ananth, who's on this program here tonight, he spoke before our committee, and I thought was very compelling, and convinced me that it is time to end the tuition freeze. And to that end, this expires at the end of this current biennium, and I'm what I'm telling my fellow legislators is, if we want to bring that back with some modest guardrails in there, I certainly understand that. But I'll let Ananth talk about why. But I think now is the time when you just look at the bang for your buck that you get for a college degree to end that tuition freeze. It's never been more affordable and cheaper for students. On the capital budget, the governor's got a $2.5 billion proposal out there, and I'm all in favor of investing in infrastructure, but we got to do it in the right places. We don't want to be investing in programs that have no marketable value to them. But there are ones that do. Anything that revolves around STEM and other technologies. I know UW-Madison is looking for a new economics building. I think there is real value in working towards that an engineering building. And we certainly support that. I think that is an example of something that's needed now, that is in demand in the marketplace. And if we're going to invest those tax dollars, let's do it at institutions that are growing, that have high graduation rates, whose student populations aren't declining, and that infrastructure is going into career fields, again, that have that marketable value right now in the outside. So there are other things in that report, but I just want to say again, this was meant to start the conversation. And our goal right now is to take these recommendations, work with stakeholders, and see if we can get some consensus and get workable legislation that we can move this fall, because we have an amazing thing here in the university system in Wisconsin. And I want to commit to working with who's ever willing to roll up their sleeves to do what we can to make sure that this system can be sustainable and provide that high level of education in what the workforce in our economy needs well into the 21st century. That's not going to come without some reforms and some tough conversations. And I'm hoping this report that we issued last week can start that conversation.
Well, thank you, Senator Roth, for joining us. I know it was a long day on the floor, but we really appreciate you starting the conversation for us here tonight.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Ananth Seshadri, Professor, Department Chair, and the Todd E. and Elizabeth H. Warnock Distinguished Chair of the Department of Economics at UW-Madison. His research interests include macroeconomics, public finance, intergenerational transmission of socioeconomic status, and racial wage disparities. He's a consultant on the State of Wisconsin Investment Board, and he serves on the Board of Editors of the Journal of Economic Literature and on the Executive Committee for the Michigan Retirement Research Center. Professor Seshadri was one of many experts giving testimony during the hearings that informed this report. Ananth, thank you for joining us tonight. I know you've got some good analysis prepared that you're going to share with our audience that can provide even better foundation for our discussion. So the floor is yours. Ananth, I think you're on mute.
I am on mute. Thank you, Mike. It's a real pleasure to be here. And, this is a shorter version of the presentation that I gave up in Green Bay in Senator Roth's committee. And so this presentation draws heavily on two reports that I wrote for the Center for Research on the Wisconsin Economy, which is a policy research center in the Department of Economics. The first concerns bonding authority, the notion that we, as an institution, be allowed to bond, especially for capital projects, and more especially for shorter-term borrowing when we are in situations such as COVID. And the second has to do with unfreezing in-state tuition. So these are reports that I wrote in 2018 and 2019. These are the type of flexibilities I think UW-Madison and UW system has been trying to obtain for the better part of a couple of decades. My motivation behind exploring these in greater depth is these are policies that really don't negatively affect any other campus at the UW system, and has the ability to just lift up places like Madison, Milwaukee, and many others without harming any other institution. Before I kind of present some evidence, I think it's useful to look back, take stock of where we are, a little bit of history. Circa 2011, I don't know, about a decade ago, there was actually a bid for public authority where we talked about many of the similar issues about bonding, about tuition freeze. Can we kind of unshackle UW-Madison from the constraints of state government? It was a bruising battle. It was unsuccessful. And for the next couple of years, after Chancellor Martin left, and we had Chancellor Ward, who was there for a couple of years, he was more of a placeholder, more of a caretaker, meant to have kind of a soothing effect on campus after that battle. UW-Madison had been raising tuition at 5.5% a year for about 5 years, from 2008 to 2013. The result was an enormous buildup of reserves. Tuition reserves were something to the tune of $648 million. And this essentially, understandably, effectively angered a lot of state legislators. So their view was the university had really increased tuition for purposes that were not needed, for expenses that were not needed for current operations. As a consequence, and associated with that, there was an extended freeze on in-state tuition, which was imposed as a punitive measure starting in 2013. In my own view, the reserve is a concept that's very frequently misunderstood. I think the reserve really represents a state's unwillingness to fund a UW system request. You go around the state and you ask a business, if you were to have like 10% of your budget as a cash reserve, is that way out of bounds? And the answer is actually no. And when you look back and the dust has settled, there's actually no evidence of impropriety. The reserves at this point are about 60% lower than what they were at that time, and it's a reserve that's kind of comparable to many of our peers. When I look back, it's interesting that in 2011 we were hoping to be unshackled and essentially trying to get out of the shackles of state government, and then we move all the way from there to an extreme form of governmental intervention. I guess I'll also point out that many of the other campuses thought that being a part of a system really would benefit everyone, but it's not obvious that the experience over the next 10 years suggests that that was actually a wise kind of move. A quick outline of my presentation: start off with some facts, review some empirical evidence, and then briefly give you 3 policy implications. The kind of technological change that we've seen in recent decades has favored skilled workers. So what the kind of technological change has done is it displaces unskilled labor, which makes skilled labor also more productive because technology and skills tend to be complementary. And if you associate skilled labor with college-educated workforce, the return to college is actually at the highest level that it's been in over a century. Fact number 2, as a consequence of the technological change that you've seen, wages of men and women with a bachelor's degree have grown substantially more than wages of those who just go get a high school diploma or drop out of high school. So this is something you see for men, you see for women, and it's been a pervasive phenomena driving an increase in inequality, which is really associated with education. Over the course of the last 2 decades or so, you hear the headline number. UW-Madison UW system used to raise tuition at 5.5% a year. That's what we call a sticker price. If you look at the net price, it's substantially lower than the sticker price. And the reason is there's a lot of aid, institutional aid, federal, state, generosity of many of the alums on the call, such as the folks on this call. And that results in the net tuition that students pay to be substantially lower than the sticker tuition. This is a concept that's actually frequently misunderstood. So let me start off with the first piece of evidence. Is college worth it? In order to ascertain how much more a college degree is worth than stopping with a high school diploma, we want to account for 2 costs. One is the opportunity cost, which is really the biggest cost of going to college, that you forego 4 years worth of earnings, and the second is the direct cost, which is tuition. The green line here plots the present discounted value of going to college relative to stopping with a high school diploma. The value of going to college relative to a high school diploma was close to $200,000 nearly 50 years ago. That number has almost tripled for men, and similar increases for women as well over the same time period. So if this looks like a genuinely large free lunch, it is. It's hard to read a newspaper and not come away with the view that there is a college debt crisis. There's actually a recent paper that connects student borrowing along with their earnings potential. It finds that borrowers at for-profit colleges accounts for about nearly half of the increase in borrowing between 2003 and 2013. And you ask the following question: where is the default the highest? It's not those big debts, not the $100,000 debt, but those with small debts. These are folks who go to smaller 2-year colleges, for-profit colleges or drop out of college. Graduates from for-profit colleges and community colleges also have more of an earning problem. I mean, their earnings are substantially lower than those who go to a four-year selective college, such as UW-Madison, where the earnings are about 2 times higher. So to the extent that you might think that there is a crisis, it is actually a selective crisis, which is really affecting non-traditional borrowers. And I think it makes sense to point out at this stage that the median debt at UW-Madison is 0. Why have college costs kind of gone up? I mean, fundamentally, if you think about college as having a production function, it's a very different production function than, and say, a manufacturing firm. You know, if you're in a manufacturing firm, the price of capital goes down, you employ more capital, and there's a substitutability between capital and labor. That's not the case in a college such as UW-Madison, where skilled labor is really the primary input in the production of the college experience. And the primary driver of the cost of college is the rising wages of highly skilled educated workers outside of the education sector. And that's one of the fundamental reasons why college costs are going to keep going up. Oftentimes you hear lack of access kind of might prevent low-income kids from going to college. The true price, as I alluded to earlier, is lower for children from poorer families. Bucky's tuition promise actually makes it cheaper to go to UW-Madison if you're low income than many of the other campuses here. But you can go deeper and ask, are there American kids? To what extent is it a pervasive phenomenon that there are kids who want to go to college and are borrowing constrained? That is, they're unable to do so. My colleague Chris Staber has a seminal paper that actually finds very little evidence that these families are borrowing constrained. As an aside, you might ask, because it's tempting to say, let's reduce the cost, let's reduce the sticker price because we want to promote low-income kids to go to college. Why don't low-income kids go to college at higher rates? If it's not tuition, it's not access to loans. Not everyone wants to go to college, but put simply, more recent evidence suggests that it's a lack of information. When low-income, high-achieving kids are presented with this sort of information, they apply, they attend, and they thrive in college. So I want to end with 3 policy recommendations. The first one I want to start off by asking, in terms of GPR, in terms of capital projects, does UW-Madison receive too much in terms of state subsidies? I think circa 2016-17, the state contributed almost $430 million to UW-Madison. I think it's legit as a taxpayer to ask, is it too much? Here's an experiment. Let's think about UW-Madison. Let's privatize it, right? As Senator Roth said, a place like UW-Madison will have no trouble filling all the 4,300 students who pay in-state tuition with the more highly paying non-resident students. So non-resident tuition is about $25,000 more. So you have freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and seniors. So for every entering freshman, the state of Wisconsin is giving them a subsidy worth $100,000. There's about 4,300 of those kids, 3,700 Wisconsin kids, and about 600 Minnesota reciprocity who pay the lower in-state tuition. 4,300 times by 100,000 is $430 million. So the value of that tuition raised, right, is $430 million. So viewed kind of through that lens, UW-Madison, the institution, actually receives no subsidy whatsoever. The way I view the state of Wisconsin's subsidy to UW-Madison is like a voucher that gives the in-state students who choose to attend Madison the right to pay the lower in-state rate as opposed to the higher in-state rate. So something that's baffled me is the fact that we just don't have bonding authority. UW-Madison, and it's just worth reiterating, is the only major research university in the United States without direct access to capital markets. There's no bonding authority and no project management capability. It's also very restricted in terms of how we can deliver projects, in terms of how timely the projects are. In one of my papers, white papers, I kind of analyzed this issue and found a substantial economic impact from awarding UW-Madison bonding authority. In an era where interest rates are super low, especially last year when the Federal Reserve was involved in capital markets in a very big way, we could have, for instance, funded the Letters and Science academic building, which is badly in need of getting funded and is the largest college at UW, producing about 80% of the freshman and sophomore credits. If we had had bonding authority, we probably would have built that 10 years ago. And now awarding bonding authority or borrowing authority, at least for shorter term needs, is extremely critical to smoothing operations. Finally, let me just really appreciate Senator Roth's willingness to entertain the idea of unfreezing in-state tuition. Price controls almost everywhere seem to have a negative effect on quantity and quality of education. There is just no evidence that tuition freezes improved access. If you want to think about what's kind of been the negative impact of effectively shutting down or reducing state funding is simultaneously with our inability to tap tuition revenue, think no further than think about our inability to expand high demand majors such as computer science, inability to build important capital building projects, and are falling in terms of our research rankings. So these are the negative consequences you see associated with extreme forms of governmental control. Good public policy is ideally driven by the desire to either promote equality of opportunity or to improve efficiency. I just don't see a tuition freeze accomplishing either one of those. The nice thing about investing in higher ed is, in general, private and social returns tend to be high. And these effects kind of last for many generations. A big question at some level is who should make these investments? Is it just the state of Wisconsin, GPR, capital projects, in-state students, out-of-state students, alumni, faculty? A well-designed system will make sure that everyone contributes and has skin in the game. Let me kind of leave it at that, and back to you, Mike.
Great. Thank you, as usual, Ananth, for solid analysis and some provocative observations that we can get to in the Q&A. Next, I'd like to welcome Cory Nettles, the founder and managing director of Generation Growth Capital, a private equity fund focused on buyouts and providing growth capital to small businesses and lower middle market companies in the upper Midwest. Previously, he served as secretary for the Wisconsin Department of Commerce. Nettles is a current board member for several corporate and nonprofit organizations, including United Way of Greater Milwaukee, Boys and Girls Clubs of Greater Milwaukee, the Milwaukee World Festival, Teach for America, the Medical College of Wisconsin, Greater Milwaukee Foundation, and the University of Wisconsin Foundation, right here at home. Thank you, Cory, for all your service and also for sharing your time with us tonight. I know the opportunity cost for you was high because there's a big Bucks game in Milwaukee. So.
Well, no, thanks, Mike. I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to be here and to speak with you and your audience again. Ananth really picked up on so many of the themes that I wanted to sound, and as a distinguished professor, he made them a lot more intelligently and with facts and with data, which I respect. So I'll maybe underscore a couple of them more rhetorically, but I'm certainly aligned with a lot of what his sentiments are. But first, let me begin by commending Senator Roth and his committee for what I think was a really well done and thoughtful report by them. I've had the benefit of reading all 97 pages and skimming it on multiple occasions. And I think it really is a good and thoughtful report. I really appreciate the senator's remarks that the report is a starting point of a larger conversation whose time has come. And I certainly share that view. Some of your audience may remember, certainly the last time I had the pleasure of being on the program, I was here to talk about a program called Falling Behind, which was done by the Wisconsin Policy Forum, looking at a lot of these same issues, but with a lot of the same issues with similar conclusions. So my thanks to the senator for advancing this extremely timely and important conversation. There's a lot in the report to discuss, and certainly the bits of it that resonate most with me are about the reorganization ideas that are presented there. Certainly, I know from my days at Commerce that we have a preeminent university system and technical college system that is the envy of many in the country as a system. And certainly within that, the flagship of our UW system at UW-Madison really stands above and apart from the rest of its very strong peer institutions. And I appreciated very much that in the proposed four district reorganization, that it's 4+1. And the committee's recognition of Madison as our flagship institution, I think, is an important starting point as we try to advance and to build on Madison's preeminence and its distinction. I guess one of the things that I wish the report had spent more time discussing, because Madison, other than to be acknowledged or called out as the flagship institution that they're going to otherwise pass on on page 45 of the report, there's not a whole lot of discussion about the things that we can do really to help advance Madison. Ananth started on some of the points that are of greatest interest to me. I'm a longtime member of an organization based in Madison called Badger Advocates, and we've been advocating for policy changes, particularly among the legislature, that would help to Madison to build upon its preeminence and its distinction. As the professor just said, bonding is chief among them. Madison is exceptional in the country in its lack of bonding capacity. And that's a problem that we ought to fix. Giving an organization of our size, of our scale, of our resources, that bonding authority helps us go to the capital markets, access them in an efficient way, and to continue to build distinction on our campus. And it's really an outrage to me that Madison, among the top institutions, Big Ten institutions, top research institutions, is singular in its lack of bonding capacity, and that's not a good distinction for us to have. Beyond that, I would want to see Madison have borrowing capacity just to manage its day-to-day cash flow. Since I started my private equity business, I've had the opportunity of acquired 40 some odd companies in the Midwest. And the day-to-day operational management of those businesses, cash is king. And to have the working capital and to be able to manage that working capital efficiently is important. And I'd certainly like to see Madison have much greater flexibility around how it manages its working capital. Certainly things around building and construction projects and letting them have more control outside of the Department of Administration process, I think, is also extremely important. So I appreciated the start of the conversation on reorg and the setting apart of Madison as a flagship institution, a special case. But I think we need to go much farther than the report does as a starting place, as Senator Roth acknowledged, and really say, what do we need to do at Madison in particular to really build on its preeminence and its distinction? I've been long opposed to the tuition freeze. I'm a rabid capitalist and a free marketeer. And I think that Madison ought to have the flexibility to set its tuition at the level that the market demands, consistent with its obligations as a land grant institution, and making sure we continue to provide for Wisconsin families with a distinction between in-state and out-of-state tuition. But I think removing the freeze, even beyond a thaw, is important. And I think that the university and its board of regents, its fiduciaries, ought to be given much more flexibility and autonomy in managing the university. The last thing I'll say, and I'll look forward to the Q&A, Senator Roth alluded to this whole issue of reimagining our educational footprint across our state. And I appreciated Senator Roth's temperance and pragmatism, realism around the politics of shutting down campuses. And he went to an analogy that I've used, which is that shutting down campuses is like decommissioning military bases. So I'm aligned with him in the use of that analogy. But I think, as he said, it is time to have this larger conversation. We have a system that we would not build today. We would not build for the next 100 years. And I think it's our obligation to the citizens of this state to really say and to imagine what a new system from a white sheet of paper will look like, and then to move as aggressively as we can toward that, and to have an appropriate public process with lots of transparency and input that allows us to get to a result that'll be more efficient and that'll better serve the citizens of Wisconsin today and the citizens for the next 100 years. And I would hope that we would not lower our sights to what is more politically feasible and doable, as opposed to really thinking bigger about what is in the best interest of the immediate and longer term interests of our state. So I'm pleased to see the report and this conversation continuing. I was pleased to see the information about the reorg. I was especially pleased to see that Madison is acknowledged as a special case. And I say that as a lifelong resident of Milwaukee. I'm sitting here overlooking Lake Michigan in Milwaukee. I'm a big fan of UW-Milwaukee, but UW-Milwaukee is not UW-Madison. It's got its own special distinction but it's not the flagship of our system. And I think Madison's got to be treated differently. And I say that as a member of this business community. And I've heard the same sort of sentiments from other members of the business community here. So thanks again to Senator Roth and his committee for their leadership and for advancing this conversation. And I'm looking forward to our Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Cory. Great remarks. Our final guest might be able to tell us a thing or two about how difficult it is to manage a system. Katharine Lyall was the first female president of the UW system and one of our longest serving from 1992 to 2004. She's known for instituting some of the system's first online courses and degrees, establishing the first annual accountability report card, and prioritizing economic development, among other achievements. Also the author of The True Genius of America at Risk, which looked at trends in public higher education over a decade ago, most of which have indeed come to fruition. Currently, she serves on the board of the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching and is a professor of economics at UW-Madison. Katharine, it is great to have you back with us, and I look forward to hearing your comments on this report.
Thank you, Mike. It's nice to be here again. And I want to thank Senator Roth and his committee members for the time it took to do the work and write this report, and that they will do in the future if this is to become the first of a long series of discussions. In my 30 or 40 years with the system, I think there's been some kind of reorganization or restructuring report just about every 10 years. So this one is right on track. The difference is that the previous ones, for the most part, have had no follow-up. And so if the committee, Senator, and you are able, along with the university, to keep this discussion going, it will really make a difference, and this report will really stand out as making a difference. With that as background, let me just make 3 quick points here. I would hope, as the discussion goes forward, we would think about and talk about higher education policy in the state of Wisconsin as part of a larger state economic development strategy. The report acknowledges the economic benefits of higher education, of course, but the state needs a statewide economic development strategy which uses its higher education systems, and I mean both systems, to implement and to drive that forward. A few years ago, the system did have a series of 4 or 5 statewide economic summits, annual events, that brought the private sector and all of the institutions, all of the campuses together for discussion of the key issues facing the state and what could be done about it by all of us. And I think that was useful and perhaps a model for something that could be adopted in some form, not copied directly, going forward. But at any rate, higher education is important in and of itself, but it's also, particularly in this state, an underutilized tool for economic growth and development. And I think we could do better on that. Point number 2. I have some personal doubts about the 15% savings estimate, but that's neither here nor there. I'm not going to quibble about the number. My point is that in the past, and there's a long and hoary tradition here, any savings that the university system has acquired through restructuring and reorganization have been recaptured by the legislature and taken out of the budget. If we want this to work for generating reinvestment funds for other things like an expansion of digital education, there needs to be some guarantee in the statutes that those savings remain with the university. Excuse me, losing my voice. It's allergy season. The third point I would make is simply an observation based on, in part, my years at the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching, looking across the country. And it's a caution. Online education is not cheaper. Your report actually cites the tuition being charged at the University of Illinois for their online course in business for $22,000 and some dollars. Southern New Hampshire University, excuse me, has about the same tuition for their online courses. Note that that's more than double Madison's current resident tuition. So thinking that digital instruction, or going big on digital instruction, is going to save a lot of money, I think is a hopeful wish that probably won't happen. There are a lot of expenses associated with online and good online instruction. And I think the experience that faculty have had in teaching this past year has brought much of that to light. So online instruction, in my view, is important. It's particularly important for reaching non-traditional audiences, but as a cost saver, not so much. So we just ought to be a little careful about that. With that, I will say thank you, and let's see what questions you have.
Great. Well, thank you, Katharine, for your remarks, and Senator Roth for kicking us off. And, I guess just to open things up, Senator Roth, since we've all kind of noted this is the beginning of the conversation. Who's the natural convener of continued discussion of this? Will your committee play a role and try to convene a larger panel of experts, or what would you envision the next step to be? Who's the natural convener for the discussion that needs to happen and the further analysis that needs to go on?
Yeah, I think our goal going into this was that we just wanted to get the placeholder there, a starting point. And then we wanted to see, now that it's out there, my hope is that over the next month and a half, we can kind of get commentary, appreciate the comments that we've heard so far tonight, but in groups like this and then reaching out with other stakeholders, just kind of get feedback to see what the thoughts are on that. And then my goal would be later this fall that we could start building out further. These recommendations, they obviously put a sort of a direction that we want to go, but there needs to be some more thought and diligence put into building those out before they'd be ready to come before the legislature in terms of legislation. So I want to, as I mentioned, just see what the reaction is. And then after that, I would hope later this fall we could start furthering that conversation.
And, in pulling Madison out on its own, I guess it was also noted by other panelists. What would that mean? Could you envision Madison having a greater degree of, call it, strategic autonomy? Maybe it's still part of the system, but maybe some things are different for Madison. Maybe there's more tuition flexibility or bonding authority. Could you envision that? Is that part of what you're thinking?
I think you would leave all those options on the table. And as you look in the report, of course, we asked the Board of Regents to kind of come up with that, but I think we'd be asking to work with other stakeholders and see, if this reorganization, if this is something that we can, get more head nods than disapproval, I think we would have to look at a change in the governance structure. I think you'd have to look at treating, and giving Madison some of those tools that some of their peers have within the Big Ten that they don't have access to right now. So I think the answer to the questions you have is a very distinct possibility.
Yeah, Lou Holland in the audience specifically asked about bonding authority. Was that something that the committee discussed and left out? And is it for Madison or the whole system? Any thoughts?
Yeah, that was not something that was within the scope of the report that we had put together right now. But that is definitely something, if you were to build upon this restructuring, that would definitely be part of that next step in the conversation.
So online education was another avenue that you talked about, and Katharine remarked it might be more expensive. Maybe from a cost of attendance standpoint, there might be some savings for individuals if the online was asynchronous and they could maybe find a way to work, or maybe they can still live at home and at least start their college. Ananth, do you have any thoughts about online education and what the system's role might be? Is there something we should be doing differently in state?
It's an intriguing concept, Mike. So we are late in the game, right, relative to many of our peer institutions. So something that I've looked into is the notion that these firms, these universities spend an enormous amount of money on marketing for an extended period of time. And so the model is one where you're willing to take a loss for a few years. You're developing this product over a period of time, and you're being selective in the development of this product, right? It makes no sense to offer online degrees in every field. You want to know where the demand is, depending on what the needs of the market and the interests of the consumer is. And so one would have to do kind of a careful market analysis and count on this kind of being a loss-making enterprise for the next 5 years with the long game, kind of like Amazon when it was entering the marketplace. So, if the state of Wisconsin is not willing to effectively underwrite that strategy, I'd be a little worried about kind of jumping into it, and going all guns blazing in the online space. But that's my rather uninformed opinion.
Mike, if I could just say, the goal of the committee, just to touch on something that Katharine had mentioned, it wasn't to use it as a cost-saving mechanism. But we were really, one of our primary concerns, again, is just the loss in the student population. And again, Madison's going to be fine. They stand alone in that. But for the other 12 comprehensives, we don't want a situation where they're kind of cannibalizing from one another, trying to get students who are going to one to come to. And that's what's going to happen with all of these 4-year regionals, the longer we move into this decade and the next. So we've got to figure out a way where we can grow student populations, recognizing that there are fewer high school seniors graduating in Wisconsin, and not just here, but all across the Midwest. So we looked at online education as being one of those ways that if we couldn't have them physically in the campus, we could at least start them in a virtual capacity, and then hopefully be able to use that in year 3, year 4 to bring them back on campus to finish up their degree. But this is all about finding students where there are none right now, is a means to making sure that our universities are full of tuition-paying students here in the future.
Katharine, there was an interesting paper written about the great financial crisis ex post. I think it started with the words, "This time is different." And you noted we've been down the path of pointing out the deficiencies in the system. My friends probably immediately shut down when I start talking about this topic because they've heard me talk about it so much by now. I'm even boring myself sometimes. How can we make this time different? I know you noted there needs to be follow-up. Are there other conditions that make it more likely we could get something done now? in your mind? And then I'll ask Cory the same question.
Yeah. Well, I think part of the answer, I don't have the whole answer, but part of the answer certainly is to enthuse faculty about this opportunity. We have an enormously resourceful, thoughtful asset in our faculty. And when presented with a problem, they come up with some very interesting answers. But I think they've been through several decades now of feeling depressed, ground down financially and otherwise, and a little bit cynical, as I was indicating, from past efforts at restructuring, which have generated savings that have then been taken from the budget. So if we could find some way to challenge the faculty to help with this restructuring, reorganization, I think that would be a good first step. And I think parents and students need to understand the challenges here, demographically and otherwise, and begin to work with us on those issues. And the senator said so as well. I think that's absolutely right.
Cory, any thoughts on how this time might be different?
Yeah, I wish I had some good insights on that. I don't. I still think that the path has got to be a broad bipartisan coalition of all the constituent groups across the state who decide that, as the senator said, the time has come for us to take action. And we've been kicking this can down the road for decades. And whether it's demographics, whether it's the existential threat to the business model and its inefficiency and its lack of sustainability, maybe we'll get to a place where there's a tipping point where of necessity we will have to do something. But I think if we are at that point or at that place, it's only going to work if there's bipartisan leadership. Obviously, the climate locally and nationally for bipartisanship is probably at its lowest point, certainly during my adult life. But I would hope that the senator, it was a bipartisan task force. I would hope that they could build a bipartisan coalition, Republicans, Democrats, business people, educators, everybody, to really say, how do we, in the interest of better serving the citizens of the state and ensuring our long-term survival, how do we reimagine the way we deliver education in our state and really go at this, with a white sheet of paper and have the courage to do it. That's my hope. Maybe I'm dreaming, but I think that's really our only shot at it.
One of the worries that some of our audience have expressed is this fear that making the case that Madison's special is dead on arrival, that Madison will be pilloried by outstate people and outstate stakeholders who, they have an important voice in this. How do you convince people that giving Madison more strategic autonomy can actually make life better for the other campuses in the system? Katharine, do you want to offer some thoughts on that?
Well, my mind goes immediately to the experience that we had, what would it be, a couple of decades ago now, when UW Hospital was given autonomy. And what happened then was that university hospitals all across the country were going belly up financially. There were a number of major university hospitals in California and on the West Coast that were simply closed, done, gone. And at that point, the Fiscal Bureau, my recollection is, here looked at the situation here and reported to Joint Finance that if they wanted to keep UW Hospital as it was, that is, as another university department, essentially, that they would need to budget, and I don't know what the number was, but it was a big number for those days, to continue subsidizing the hospital to keep it going. And of course, Joint Finance said, wow, maybe not. And then the Fiscal Bureau said that the alternative is to basically give them the flexibilities to be managed as a quasi-public institution, which is what they are now. And the legislature wisely did that. And I think the hospital provides a model to look at, not to copy necessarily directly, but it has its own board, it has bonding authority, it sets prices within some limits, some structure, and it has thrived. And moreover, it's thrived without the state having to have this huge subsidy for it. So there's a successful case. And it seems to me that I know that was brought on by fiscal exigency at the time. And that's what it took to get everybody to take it seriously, that it was necessary to, quotes, do something, either close it or give it some autonomy. And it may be that we're approaching a point like that with UW-Madison.
Mike, can I just add that this is a place where leadership and courage is going to matter. And I really, again, commend Senator Roth from Oshkosh, whose committee notes that UW-Madison is the flagship. President Lyall noted earlier that, decades ago, we used to do these economic development summits, and they recognized that UW-Madison is an economic juggernaut for the state of Wisconsin. And that's not just in Dane County, that's for the state of Wisconsin. So some of these outstate representatives and senators need to have the courage to say to their constituents, what's good for Madison is good for Oshkosh, it's good for Janesville, it's good for Wausau, it's good for La Crosse, it's good for Eau Claire, it's good for Fenimore. We've got to have the courage to say that because it is, and all the facts, bear that out. And we can't allow ourselves to become this parochial and reductive sort of society where we're going to claw everybody down and we're going to have a race to the bottom or to the middle, to the mediocre middle. So this is a place where I think Senator Roth has demonstrated some of that leadership and the work that's been done here by putting this on the table. But those folks outside of Dane County have got to speak up. People like me in Milwaukee have got to say, I love UW-Milwaukee. UW-Milwaukee is not UW-Madison. I went to Lawrence University. Lawrence University is not UW-Madison. And we can't be, navel gazing or looking down at our shoes in shame about this phenomenal institution that we've built. And we've got to help everybody in the state understand that what's good for UW-Madison will be good for our state and our economy. It's what the entire Wisconsin idea is all about. And we need to go and carry that message forward.
Yeah, and I think importantly, that can be harvested, those gains and improvements, without more state money. It's really more flexibility that can enable that, and that might allow more attention and energy to support other campuses as well. And, again, strategic autonomy, whatever you want to call it, doesn't need to mean we have to break up the system. I'm agnostic about that, but certainly we could be doing better without spending more money. I am going to give Ananth a chance to offer some final thoughts since we're past the top of the hour. And then I'd like Senator Roth to offer his closing thoughts, having heard some of the discussion tonight. So Ananth.
Let me just reiterate something that Cory, 2 points, just one related to Cory's comment and one related to Katharine's. So one related to what Cory said was bonding. But think in terms of strategic flexibility, think bonding authority. This is not a zero-sum game, right? Currently, the system is kind of in a zero-sum game. There's GPR coming in, it gets divvied up. Can we grow the pie, which is kind of what bonding does? Something that's been puzzling to me is that you would have thought, UW-Madison could get a great bond rating. This would increase the level of economic activity in terms of buildings, structures, and so on. And that's going to benefit construction companies throughout the state of Wisconsin. So, the size of the pie kind of grows. So it should not necessarily be as as much of a problem to get this through, but for some reason it seems as if there is. The other point I'll make is, based on the experience over the last 8 years, when we've had an extreme tuition freeze relative to our peers, what happened in such a situation is UW-Madison expanded the number of in-state students, which kind of eats into the in-state students that would be going to Milwaukee, Oshkosh, and other institutions, right? So ironically, even though at that time the view was, let's kind of keep Madison in a part of the system, when you squeeze Madison, it has a negative perverse effect on the rest of the system. So, thinking strategically, thinking about giving authority in terms of tuition, bonding, I'm also agnostic about whether we're part of the system, clearly seems to me to be the right strategy to poise the state of Wisconsin for the next century.
Thank you. Senator Roth, final thoughts for us tonight.
Yeah, well, really appreciated this conversation. Katharine mentioned, that about once a decade something like this comes along and there doesn't seem to be follow through. And I certainly won't disagree with how things have happened in the past. And I say this knowing that what I'm about to say might mean that my feet get held to the fire, but our goal here is to have some follow through and to continue to work this, to talk to stakeholders and see what we can do to build upon what we've started here. But I also want to be realistic with everyone. And a state senator, a group of legislators, our ability really to go in here and transform higher education in Wisconsin on our own is pretty limited. But what we can do is we can do the due diligence in research to put together sound proposals and policy. But at the end of the day, we're going to need, I think, an executive, a governor, who's willing to pick up the proposal that we're able to work and collaborate and put together. You're going to need that kind of synergy and energy. So as I see it right now, my task and those who want to join in what we're doing here is to get the policy right. And once we have the policy right, then we can begin to expand upon that and build that momentum. But I do think that you're going to need an executive who comes to Madison and says that this is a priority for them, and then works with and uses their influence with the legislature to get something bold and dynamic like this passed.
Well, I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. Very thoughtful remarks and comments, and I look forward to the sequel that we're going to have when we convene again to take this up later in the summer or next fall.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Well, it's quite a subject. It's fair to ask. We have a great system. It was created in 1974. It served us pretty well. Why do we need to do anything different? Well, really, the stakes are higher than they were in 1974. Higher ed was kind of a sleepy industry in 1974. Because the economic gains weren't nearly as big for graduates as they are today. And we saw that clearly in Professor Seshadri's slides. The other thing that we didn't appreciate in 1974 is the role that we see research universities playing in their regions as beachheads for the knowledge economy. And that's the other thing that's really significant about the flagship campus, and is very different than the circumstances were in 1974. Higher education is a large and thriving business, and we have to let ours thrive in the state of Wisconsin. And the other thing that's different, and this was really called out in the report, are just the demographic shifts that we see that's leading to changes in enrollment. As the senator noted, no impact on Madison. There's a line out the door. We could take students all day long, but that's not true everywhere. So we really need to come together and address this. So thanks for tuning in tonight. If you haven't already, please take a moment to join fellow Badgers and sign the petition of support for UW-Madison and the UW system in the 21-23 Wisconsin state budget at uwalumni.com/advocate. We will be back again next Tuesday, May 18th, where we will discuss the transition to post-pandemic norms in leisure, relationships, and life. Until then, on Wisconsin.
You can try, but you'll never stop a Badger. Because we Badgers are born with curious minds and endless heart. When we see a curve in the road, we speed up. When there are mask shortages for first responders, we make our own supply chain. When there's a world on pause, we sharpen our claws. Through thunder, fire, and pandemics, we'll keep going. Because after all, you can't stop a Badger.